Hello, and welcome back to the Truth Within podcast, where we will be sharing precious teachings and divine female wisdom that's being remembered for our time. I'm your host, Jo Youle, and each week I will be in conversation with Dee Delaney, author of the Truth Within trilogy. This week, we are discussing what it feels like to truly feel as we ask so many people who've become disconnected to their feelings and their intuition. You can subscribe to our podcast through sacredstoriesmedia.com or search The Truth Within on iTunes. Connect directly with Dee via her website at deedelaney.co.uk. And you can also follow me, Jo Youle, on @Reset Rebel Productions on Instagram. If you're interested in creating your own podcast series, I produce creative audio for brands, businesses, and provide digital content across the board. So Dee, welcome to today's podcast on this beautiful balcony that you've welcomed me to here in Ibiza.
Hi, Jo.
Such a pleasure to be back on board. What is, I believe, episode number 3. I just think we should get probably straight into this issue of feelings that we're going to be tackling today. And I think, we are not taught how to feel as human beings. And so many people really struggle to really express themselves honestly. And I think it's something that you do so well. So let's get into that.
Yeah, gosh, and especially if like us, you were brought up in the UK where we're really told as kids to be quiet, aren't we? And we're told to be seen and not heard. And so this lack of connection to the feeling self is a collective issue that many people are faced with. And there's real depth with an understanding when we can really know what we're feeling. I mean, how are we meant to know how to manage life if we don't know how we feel? I mean, it's a fundamental tool that we all need to get back in touch with. And we get back in touch through our hearts and this divine wisdom that comes through our hearts. And it's a balance between what's intuition and what's ego, and we need to know what the difference is. And the way we do that is to be in touch with our feelings. The voice of intuition always feels aligned. It always comes from a loving state, and it feels all-knowing. And it comes from being very present in the moment. And you just know when you know. It's hard to describe what that feels like because you feel it, and you feel it in your heart. The ego has an agenda, and it's based on separation and fear, and it's controlling and manipulative. And in truth, these are two very different states, and there's a massive difference between the two. I think the ego comes from, as we talked about in our last episode, it comes from controlling and pushing, whereas intuition comes from being, and they're very different states. But many people have forgotten what it's like to really feel, and what they've done is they've compartmentalize feelings into good feelings and bad feelings. And actually, that causes a lot of problem, because when we stick so-called bad feelings in a box, we suppress them. And they need to be felt. So things like jealousy and anger and fear, they need to be felt, they need to be processed, and they need to be released. But if we don't allow ourselves to do that, we suppress them, and then we project them onto others, which we'll come to talk about later. So we need to reconnect with our intuition, with our feeling heart, which is like, I call it like my GPS, my goddess guidance system. It's my inner system that lets me know that I'm on track. And the only way I can do that is to feel every emotion through my body. And that means feeling things like anger, jealousy, guilt and shame from my past that might be stuck in my body. I need to the only way to move on for me in life is to process all of that, because if I don't process it, it will manifest in disease within the body. So we need to learn to feel again. And when we do, we actually reprogram the way we live as we experience the fullness of life moment to moment.
I think, yeah, that's exactly how it goes. And I can really relate to what you're saying, especially as you pointed out, growing up in England. And I think that is a very British thing, isn't it? That sort of obsession with obsession and politeness, which definitely leads to suppression. So much so, I feel like, you know, we even apologise for breathing in England, or bumping into people, people bumping into us. We then say sorry. And that, I just find it utterly ridiculous, to the point where I think, you know, we even apologise for our own existence. And I think it just really affects our ability to completely put ourselves out there and really get to know ourselves. And that this suppressive kind of force starts from a young age. And as you said before, being seen and not heard as a child, you know, at the dinner table, not being able to engage in adult activity because we are just children, you know, is awful. It's actually truly awful. And, you know, when we're told how to feel, not to be angry, oh, don't be sad. Well, why the hell not? You know, why can't we be sad? What's wrong with being sad? What is wrong with crying as a child? You know, if there's any one opportunity in this whole lifetime to really be authentically and deeply you, unashamedly, is when we're not, you know, full of responsibilities for other people's feelings by our own actions. So I just feel like this locking away of our emotions is incredibly unhealthy, as you just described, the disease that can bleed into. And, you know, these feelings don't go away. They're not going anywhere. They're staying inside us. And then the next thing you know, you're an adult, you're in a total pickle. And I love the way that you share your childhood story in your first book, The Truth, My Journey to the Other Side, where you talk about being a parentified child and how for years into your adulthood that you lived behind the veil of being the good girl who fixated on helping others but abandoned herself. And I think that's, you know, it happens a lot in big families with elder sisters and things like that. So, I mean, can you describe what you've had to do to break this spell and finally step out from behind that veil and reclaim your true self?
Yeah, I was a kid. I grew up as a kid who was the good girl, who did the chores, who always helped mummy and daddy. And so there was no space for me. And then I brought that into adulthood to a woman who became codependent and a people pleaser. So doing things for others because there was no space for me to express my own feelings. So I had to do a massive amount of unraveling I had to do a lot of work to go back into my childhood emotions, a lot of inner child work to really feel what I was feeling at that time energetically, to allow those to release, because I'd brought all these patterns of super serving others into my adult life because that's how I was as a child. So a lot of the work I do and I talk about in my first book is about giving myself permission to heal. And there are 3 magic words I want you to remember when you do this work. And it's intention, will, and imagination. So intention comes from absolutely knowing you want to change. The will comes from your desire for change. And the imagination comes from believing that you can change. So that's kind of the magic formula for creating this change. And how we do it is first we sit in silence and we focus our intention on remembering the experience that created the feeling that you want to change. So remembering your anger as a little girl. So you go back and you go back to that time, and that's uncomfortable. It takes real courage. And that's where the will comes into play, because you trust the silence to hold space for you. The silence is like magic, and it's not going to hurt you. And if you just can sit through it, it will, I promise you, it will give you the strength to cut through the fear. There's no more than that. It's there waiting for you. And the imagination comes when you bring the experience into form, and you can almost like bring it into like a ball or a box or a bubble, and you send it out through your mind's eye into the ether, and it's gone. That's how this inner child works. We going in energetically into the energy that's locked within your body to set your intention, use your will, and then imagine it in form and release it and let it go. And your body knows what to do. Your body knows how to get out of the way to allow these feelings to rise. Your body wants you. Everything, every emotion, every memory is kept within the body. But the body is a gift and it wants to help you. We just need to get out of the way and let it do its work. And what happens when you do this work? You feel it on a physical way in the body, and you feel it in a cellular way. And I feel it like energy rising, almost like there's a great surge and an expansion like bubbles. And then I feel some fear. I feel I feel this surge rising. It hits the heart, and then you feel the heart open. And the openness in the heart comes from a realization that what you're holding on to cannot hurt you, can't hurt you. Because you're not that feeling, you're the love that sits behind that feeling. And when the heart opens, it pours love onto that feel or that anxiety, the pain and suffering, and it transmutes it to light. That's it, and it's gone. And it's gone. And then we realize that we are not this pain that we're holding on to, and we're not these negative emotions, and we reclaim the power that they have over us. And that's really, really powerful work.
I think a lot of that comes from this idea of possibility as well, as you mentioned. And, I love this expression, I believe it when I see it. That very negative kind of diatribe that comes from being in England, probably, mostly. I feel like I've heard people say that so much. And then I saw something brilliant the other day, which was, when I believe it, I will see it. And I thought, I like that little twist on that, because I think really having that belief, really being able to visualize something being possible, and really knowing that pain or that suffering or that experience of feelings that aren't necessarily pleasurable is, you've got to believe that there's something else available to you, and you've got to be able to know that you do need to do a bit of work to get there. And it all sounds so very simple, particularly in your language, and you've obviously done a lot of that work, but I think there's so many layers that need to be stripped away to get through and release that deep-rooted issue that we're tackling and that we're dealing with and we're struggling with, like the guilt, like the shame, like the anger. And I'm sure you've experienced, I know that you've experienced all of those different emotions from reading the books in the aftermath of that terrible grief that you've suffered. But I think sometimes maybe we're not even aware that these issues exist in the real world, because, as we said in the introduction, they kind of hide out in the shadows, the realms, those dark, deep crevices that many of us are really not willing to have a rummage around in. And I think some people go for a whole lifetime without even going there. And that's, well, that's okay if that's your choice. But I think that the unconscious mind unravels so much, and we only learn about all of that through our relationship. I think through, to other people when we're in a relationship, with that big old mirror is held up, and sometimes it's really not something that we want to see looking back at us, but it's unescapable when you're in a relationship with another person to sort of see that in all its glory, and sometimes it's very ugly and painful and difficult. But I think that how do you know when you're projecting your issues on others? It's something that's talked and bandied around a lot as an expression, like projecting. But how do you make a distinction between what's yours and maybe what is somebody else's issue?
Wow. It's a big one.
Discuss. Maybe we should get a pen and paper out and write an essay.
Yeah. Oh God, how do you know? It is a big one, and it's taken me years, really years, to get to the bottom of what's mine and what's yours, what's projection and what's reflection. It's such an interesting one, and as you said, I learned a lot about this through what I call my love teachers, through the men in my life, who shone a light really on the parts of me that were out of balance, my shadow realm, which nobody wants to admit that they might have jealousy or they might be angry. Nobody wants to admit the nasty stuff. We're very, that takes real honesty to say, actually, no, I was jealous then, or no, actually, I did have an issue with this situation, or actually, yeah, I could be a bit unpleasant at times. It takes a brave person. So sometimes people come into our life to show us what we're lacking in ourselves and to shake us up and wake us up so that we can really see. And the way a person behaves is always their stuff, always. But the way you react is always yours. Always, 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 categorically. However many times we want to point the finger, there's always 3 pointing back. If I act angry, that's my anger. It's not theirs. Even if the situation, caused me to act, it's my anger. It's, we talk about when we do shadow work, we talk about triggering. These beautiful relationships come to us to trigger us, to teach us about what is within us. If there was no anger in me, I would not be angry. It is that simple. But we don't always want to see it. We don't always want to see it. And that's why I said with my relationships with men, I felt like I've had my own personal Groundhog Day, because there are some things that have kept surfacing. Change the man, it's there again. Change the man, it's there again. So it has to be me, because I am reacting to it. So it's really interesting. It's super, super interesting. And I think once you can stop and breathe and see it in the moment, okay, this is making me feel angry inside. After a while, you end up allowing the anger to release, but you don't react on it. So it's yours, but you allow it to release. Could
you make this a bit more personal for us? Can you give us an example of maybe something, those mirror moments that have come up for you that you've just gone, don't know what I'm going to do about this. It's clearly coming back.
Oh gosh. Jealousy was the one. My last partner was a beautiful, curious individual, a real raconteur, but he had let's just say he was always surrounded by beautiful women. And
like you.
Yeah, like me, but like many others. And I used to laugh about him and his harem. And I think it was a challenge. He came into my life to teach me about boundaries, because I had to say, okay, I knew he was trying to make me jealous by being surrounded by all these women. And it was his way of kind of saying, okay, if you don't play ball, there's always someone else waiting in the wings. There was always someone else waiting in the wings. But I wasn't jealous in that moment. And I think he came to teach me about boundaries, because I was able to say, you know what, that is your stuff, mister. That's your insecurity. And we parted ways and it was fine. But then he ended up, actually dating one of my friends. And when I saw her, oh my God, was I jealous. And then I went, okay, Dee, so is you. And I had to learn from it. And I kind of said, okay, maybe you were jealous. Okay, yes, he taught you boundaries. Yes, he taught you that you don't want to be with a man who makes you feel uncomfortable, but like that. But actually, yes, you were jealous, and admit it. And then once I could see it, I kind of went, okay, eat humble pie. And I had my tail between my legs and I walked away and I said, okay, look at this. But the jealousy was valid in a sense, because I thought, because I don't want to be with somebody who makes me feel that way, which is why I ended the relationship. And it was okay to feel that, because I didn't act on it. I let it sit and I processed it. And oh my God, I felt this rising intensity, but I didn't turn into a screaming banshee with her. I didn't, when I saw her recently, I said nothing. And do you know what happened? I held my space. I was graceful and dignified. And we happened to be in the same restaurant. She got up and left because she knew she has her own stuff to deal with, and that's her stuff. And I think some of it was guilt and shame about going off with somebody's ex so soon after we split. So yeah, that was an interesting one. And I think we will always experience these gnarly, ugly emotions that sit within us, all because we're human. But the trick is to get to a point where we don't react with them and we don't say something that's hurtful to another. I wouldn't want to have acted out my jealousy and hurt her, because it's my stuff, not hers.
Well, it's just acceptance, isn't it? That's the situation, and it's not going to change. It's happened, it's been, it's gone, and you've just got to move on. So I think the fact that you did that with Grace is, really, really beautiful. And just thinking about any of my past encounters, not really terribly sure I want to share them on this podcast, but I think we get triggered all the time, and it's so easy to blame the other person, especially if they've behaved really badly. But I think that deep down, we know when we are behaving in a way that's not going to really be serving us. And we know what our own stuff is, neither of us are, in our 20s. And I think we just spin a great big web of deceit around our hearts, and we almost tell ourselves the story we want to hear. We're very good at that as human beings, I think, sort of just pacifying and giving ourselves the kind of version of the truth that we really want to work with. We can be great imagination creators and really finding our way into those areas that make us believe the truth that we wish to tune into. And I think there are some truths that most people struggle to accept. Like, nobody really wants to admit when they're jealous or angry, like you have just done. So hats off to you for that. But how do we overcome this stubbornness and this sort of really deal with some of these traits that are buried deep within us?
Yeah, we do, as you say, have to accept our part in the story and really get intimate with our feelings again. We need to watch the patterns and cycles, especially when they keep reoccurring, because they will, because life comes to us to show us what we need to know, to teach us the lessons. And this is the beauty of life. It doesn't judge us, but it sure as hell will keep giving you the lesson. And the lessons get richer and deeper and more painful until you sit up and really pay attention to what is making you feel this way. And then you get to the core of it. And you have to ask yourself, what is it in me that's making me feel like this? And often we have to, in the moment, just it's that magical moment of silence that we sit, and I think this voice within will come and she will speak, and she has the answers for us. But we have to give her that moment of silence to give us that answer. And it always comes from a place of knowing, when you're being bitchy, you know it, and you catch yourself in the moment. You go, oh, actually, Dee, that was really quite, but you do it anyway. And my little boy, one incident, I was having a really horrid argument with my daughter, and he was saying, this is going to come back to bite you in the butt, Mum. And I was like, oh God, you're so wise. But it was true, because I knew I was going into repeating an old cycle with her, and she was trying to tell me, this makes me feel bad, Mummy, even though you think what you're saying. I was making a judgment on her, not knowing that I was judging her. I was actually commenting on the way she looked. And I thought I was being really nice, but she was trying to tell me, but Mummy, that makes me feel bad, because actually the way I look, I've got a real issue with it. So please just don't make an opinion about me. So it's a constant learning process. And it's not always easy, and I get it wrong a lot, especially when I think I'm being nice. Especially, when you think you're giving someone a compliment, but actually you don't know. And you don't know how that person is really feeling on that day. So having a real conscious awareness about what we say is really important. It's that right speech is actually think before you open your mouth, and it's not always easy to do. And when we do that, we kind of see, there is this eternal love in every expression in life, even the stuff that we don't think is right. That's another judgment call. So you don't know where someone is coming from in that moment. So sometimes it's better to say nothing and just sit back and observe. And that comes from a lot of discipline, switching off the mind and switching off the mouth, and saying nothing is quite powerful at times.
Almost going back to our second theme in the last podcast of the silence, the silence within. I think, it's again, though, putting those techniques that we discussed as the tips of, I think the meditation practice for me is the most powerful of all, of being able to shut down that, retort, that reaction, because often when we react in the moment, we don't react in the way we want to react. And I learned that the hard way, actually, when I worked at BBC, from just reacting on email. And I just remember one of my bosses sort of saying, you can't write emails like that in the moment. You need to get up from your desk, go and make a cup of coffee, or grab a glass of water, or go for a walk around the block and, take a deep breath and come back and respond. Because I think that was in my 20s. I had no clue what I was doing back then. I was very fiery. And I think, it just comes from experience. It just comes from, a little bit of acceptance of knowing that about yourself, and taking a little bit of distance from it. And I think, we can wrap up this podcast by sharing maybe with our listeners a little bit more about the secrets to connecting with your intuition, because I feel like this is a real skill and feminine tool that, sometimes we can just bat off and ignore. But, sometimes this really comes on strongly from us, and it's difficult to know when to really listen and when to use this. So I'd love to hear more from you about that.
Yeah, there's this beautiful Native American proverb that says, listen to the wind, it talks. Listen to the silence, it speaks. And listen to your heart, it knows. And for me, that kind of really encompasses everything, what it is to live in divine communion, because it calls you to be in touch with nature, the world around, and yourself, your heart. listen to your heart, because it has the wisdom of the universe inside. And this intuition is never wrong. We say it again and again and again, but we ignore it. We ignore it. But I want to say one of the real pieces of advice is forgiveness, because we're all here. Even the people who don't act so nicely, we're all here just learning. We're all here doing our best. And so we have to be really forgiving with ourselves first and foremost. Really, really, truly, deeply, madly forgiving with ourselves when we do something that is perhaps not the best expression of ourselves. Moment to moment, okay, God, I've done it again, but okay, I'll live. It's not the end of the world. So for me, that's the first piece of advice, is to just forgive and be gentle with yourself. Most of us have been so disconnected from our feelings for so long that we have to, work on these practices to get back in touch with our intuition, and it takes time. I went through a great phase of really not trusting myself, and it's a really, really uncomfortable place to be when you don't trust yourself. And because you do stuff and then life comes and shows you've done it wrong, and you're like, oh God, but I thought that was so wrong. And you end up going round in this soup in your head and getting really frustrated. But every little step is a step closer to learning that lesson. Everything, even the steps that are quite uncomfortable, and and even the ones that we repeat time and time again, it's all a step closer to learning that lesson. And it's okay. We have to get comfortable with making mistakes. We have to get comfortable with putting our hands up and saying, okay, I got it wrong. There was a time in my life where, oh my God, you'd have to pin me to a cross. There's no way I could admit that I got something wrong. Ever. And now I'm very good at saying, I'm really sorry I got that wrong, because there is a strength in acknowledging that. There was another time when I absolutely insisted that I was always right. Absolutely, categorically. I know everything, I'm always right. And I have to admit, I'm just starting a 9-month course, and this amazing teacher I'm working with has kind of proved me, actually, she's got the list out, and it's really quite, there's a humility in seeing your mistakes. You need to have humility to do this work, to look yourself in the eye and say, oh my God, I've been judging people all my life without knowing it, thinking that good judgments were still okay. That's like saying that good feelings are okay and bad feelings. Actually judgment, is still an opinion, and that can still lead to conflict and pain. So that for me was a massive awareness, and it was like, oh my gosh, how do I unravel this one? So, I always say, if ever I doubt myself, I always know that this is not my intuition, because there is no doubt with intuition. There is only love and knowing with intuition. So when something feels and comes from a place of love and knowing, then follow the path that takes you.
What a lovely way to finish on this path taking us somewhere. And I think that our intuition is just the most beautiful path, that real path towards almost the unknown, because we never really know whether intuition is real or right. But, as you've just been saying, there's no real right or wrong answer, and mistakes are there to be made for all of us and to learn from. So everything is a path towards a deeper intuition and connection to it. Thank you so much for sharing your thoughts. Is there like a final message that you want to share?
There is. Please let your heart be your guide. The wisdom of the universe is inside.
Gorgeous closing there. Thank you so much, as well, of course, as always, to our wonderful listeners for tuning in today. You can find the Truth Within podcast at sacredstoriesmedia.com, on iTunes, or from your favourite podcast provider. And you can also connect with Dee via her social media pages on Instagram and Facebook at Dee Delaney 01, and find out about Dee's books on her website www.deedelaney.co.uk, or you can connect with me, Jo Youle, via my podcast service at Reset Rebel Productions. Big love until next time.